everyone, and welcome to the horror panel. I'm Gina, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. And we have three local authors that I'm going to introduce to you. If I am sorry, this isn't very loud, and I'm usually very loud on my own. So if you can't hear me, just raise your hand and I'll know. Either that or I'll call on you for a question that you didn't ask. We'll figure it out. At the end of the session, you will get a chance to ask some questions that you may have. So I'm going to give them a chance to tell you a little bit about what they do after I introduce them, and then we're going to go into some questions. And again, if something didn't get covered, we'll give you some time at the end to cover that. We're going to do as much as we can, and I'm going to do what I can to keep them on point so we can get to as much as we can in this 30 minutes, okay? But we thank you for being here this morning with us. I know you just got here, and we appreciate that you start your morning with us. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce from the far end on in. Okay, so Alex Kimmel is the first person that I'm going to introduce. Alex lives in Situate, Rhode Island with his family and two dogs. His books, The Key to Everything, The Chorus of Wolves, and The Idea of North are Amazon bestsellers. His short fiction has appeared in publications by Dynatox Ministries, Black Lantern Press, Front Row Lit, Canyon Voices, Word Podcast, and Dumb White Husband. So that's Alex Kimmel. And next is L.L. Kraft, who was born and raised and still resides in Rhode Island. From a young age, Kraft has been obsessed with all things horror, comic books, movies, and especially novels. Also influenced by occult writing and dark-edged heavy metal, his interests reflect his affinity for darkness. He's not for the faint of heart. And immediately to my right is Peter J. Larrabee, who writes for Motif magazine and works in the local craft beer industry in Rhode Island. He's been writing for his entire life in the genres of science fiction and fantasy, but he found a home in horror, particularly Lovecraftian horror and weird fiction. Peter Larrabee. And we're going to start off, I'm going to let them in the same order. I'm going to ask them to just introduce themselves, what they have here today, and a little bit about themselves. Alex?
Hi, thanks for coming, everybody. Like she said, these are my three books.
If you can just speak right into the mic.
Can you hear me?
That's better.
Can we turn it up, maybe?
I think that's what we got.
Okay, that's fine.
Be as loud as you can to project.
Okay.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Outside folks.
Yes. I'm selling these books here today. I've been a part of ARIA for about 5 years. There was less than 50 of us when I first started. Now there's over 200, which is great. Been writing horror ever since I started writing, which is as long as I can remember. And I tend to write more surreal type stories that are hard to explain when you've read them. I like to create a little bit of confusion. Just I'll be at the table. I'm selling each book is $15. Two books together are $25 and all three are $30. And now on to LL.
Hey everybody.
Hello, Kraft. Can you tell us a little bit about your work?
Well, I pretty much grew up in the 80s, which was the beginning of the slasher movie genre. As a writer, Alec just said he's very surreal. I'm probably the opposite. I'm very in your face. Everything is graphic. Everything is right there. I don't pull any punches. Not for the faint of heart is a fitting motto for me because nothing that I've enjoyed my whole life has been for the faint of heart. A little bit of a dark soul. All my interests have always been towards the occult, horror, some dark sci-fi, and it reflects in my writing as far as the in-your-face go. I have two books here. Abigail was actually semi-influenced by two things: the movie I Spit on Your Grave and King Diamond's epic horror album, Abigail. And it's about a young woman who ran away from home and was brutally assaulted and left for dead. She's discovered by her real family, who's the ancient and deadly LaFay Coven. And now she owns a fetish occult club in Chicago. She's a recluse, but when she finds out the Chicago Mafia is starting a sex trafficking ring, she takes exception to that, leaves her club, and goes after the mob. So half the book is about the present with her war with the mob and introducing all the characters. The other half are flashbacks of how she came into her power. The other book I brought with me today is Every Dog Has Its Day. It's got some local flavor. It's about a schizophrenic female serial killer named Bad Kitty who's targeting adulterous men. She meets them at Halloween parties, and if they'll go back to the motel with her, she knows that they're a dog, and she'll kill them. One half of her personality is a psycho killer. The other half is a little girl named Kitty, so there's some dark comedy in there. Both books are very rough. The violence is very graphic. There's horror. There's also some erotic content. I mix pretty much every vice I have in one neat package. They're $10 a piece, 2 for $18. I also have e-card versions available for them, and I'm at table 317.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Pete Larrabee. I actually grew up right here in Cranston. My work is also different from my colleagues here. I lean more towards a very atmospheric, sort of Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft kind of vibe. My first book, Revenant, is a horror thriller set in Providence, where ex-journalist Jake King, he's crossed the mob, his mother's in a mental institution, and for reasons he does not understand, he begins seeing and communicating with the spirits of the dead, but not in a prime-time crime-solving way, more in a horrifying visions of how they died kind of way, where he experiences how they died. Things get even more complicated when he discovers a shadowy entity that's been stalking him and his family for some odd 20 years. And the spin-off novella I have with me today, Legend Haunted, takes one of the characters from Revenant and gives her her own misadventure where she discovers an abandoned town in upstate Massachusetts while trying to get on a camping trip, and it goes horribly awry. The car gets totaled, they can't get signal, and as they go through the town and try to escape, they start to come across some very, very unpleasant things.
Thank you. Now, the one thing I'm not someone that has that I don't have a lot of knowledge on horror, so I'm mediating and I'm learning with some of you. You're probably huge fans, but I want to know for myself, what makes it horror? What goes into the horror genre? And anybody can answer. Excuse me? What makes it horror? So what makes you fit into the horror genre? What would that be?
To me, horror has always kind of been taking a good hard look at what people don't want to see. I think that's the best description I can come up with for it, whether it's blood, guts, gore, viscera, or just the darker side of life that people are generally afraid of. It forces you to confront something you might not want to. I think that's what really makes it very different from a lot of other genres.
Alex, did you have anything that you want to share?
Well, I think horror is pretty much central to any genre. Any of the typical hero's journey theme that most fiction is based on, everything starts with something horrifying. It's just a matter of, whether it's a broken heart, or if it's a monster chasing you down the street, or if it's the apocalypse starting, or a bully at school. Everything, to a certain degree, is horror. It's scary. The horror genre itself, that's specific horror, if you ask me, like Pete says, it kind of zeroes in on it and focuses in on the scariest part and makes that the basis of the entire, and there goes the water, the basis of the entire story. Whereas other genres kind of circle around it, horror focuses in specifically on that.
So it goes right after it. Okay. See, when I think of horror, oftentimes it's that frightening in your face, like the slasher type that you had talked about. I often, that to me is what I think of when it's horror. But each one of you, which I think is great, has a different style. Yeah, I know within the genre, you each have your own little way of presenting your writing. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, to start with Pete, what is it that makes your writing unique? Why do you write the way you do? How do you write that's different than other people?
Well, I borrow a lot from Lovecraft in terms of style, certainly. I don't go fully with the archaic language like he can, and I try very hard not to make it as verbose as he can get into, but I spend a lot of time working very, very hard to recreate that kind of atmosphere. And the biggest challenge with that is when you're telling a story, especially with writing Revenants, it was very, very hard trying to create some characters that could go into that deep, dark, depressing kind of a state and still be effective people when danger came calling. So there's a lot of comic relief in it as well, in order to kind of break that up and make the story move along. Without that, it would just be a very long, hard slog through my book. I freely admit that. But the horror element itself, it's almost, in a lot of ways, very psychological and very atmospheric and very much Providence oriented, because some parts are almost a walking tour of the city. So between that and the weird shadowy entities and the things lurking at the edges of our perception, that's kind of where my style comes in, with that lurking terror type vibe.
So you would totally Lovecraftian.
Lovecraftian, yeah.
Okay. Now Lovecraft.
Like I said in my intro, I think my style is different for two reasons. One is just the full throttle. I'm in your face. Like Peter mentioned atmosphere, Alec mentioned atmosphere, and a lot of horror is atmospheric. There's things lurking in the shadows. You're walking slowly through the hallway wondering what's going to jump out at you. My character's coming straight at you. You see them coming. And that's part of the fear too, because you know what these people are, what they're going to do, and they're just coming. I also, in Every Dog Has Its Day, dealt with something that's always intrigued me, which is the horror of the mind. That kitty is a deranged killer, but the point is, she's also a very sick woman. She's mentally ill, and there's a section where the criminal psychologist is talking about that and trying to stress that this woman doesn't even know she's a killer, she doesn't even know she's sick. And I've always, ever since I read The Exorcist, William Peter Blatty, where the priest had to spend half the time figuring out is she possessed or is she mentally ill, that's always intrigued me, that difference between evil or sick. So I enjoy that, but the big difference in my style is I don't do atmosphere, which is what a lot of horror relies on. I'm very dialogue driven. I don't have a lot of narrative, and I don't put a lot of purple prose, flowery descriptions, but my dialogue drives my stories. The characters' actions drive my stories. I like to think that you can see this book playing as a video in your mind. So I'm very dialogue driven, very minimal narrative, but the scenes, the violence, the erotic content, and everything is very graphically done, but through the characters with very brief descriptions of their action. So I think that makes me a little bit different, and both books have a feminist horror slant, which is a little different these days.
Okay. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about what makes your writing style unique?
Kind of in between both Pete and LL. My books tend to, in my view, the scariest things are the things we don't understand. You know, there's a reason we're afraid of the dark, because we don't know what's there. There's a reason when people think about how big the universe is, they get nervous because of the unknown, and that's what's the scariest for me. And so in my writing, I'll raise questions that I don't necessarily give the answers to. I like reading books and seeing scary movies where you might not see the alien, or you can only catch a glimpse of the monster. Because if it's created in your mind, to me, it's kind of scarier than if everything is described to you. But at the same time, real world horror is pretty scary to me too. You know, people murdering and killing and all, you know, things like LL is describing. So I mix in a little of that from time to time as well. But I'm influenced heavily by Lovecraft, more in his universal views of the unknown and the inexplicable, rather than his prose. The cosmic horror that he described is more impactful in my writing than the way he wrote it necessarily. So that's kind of where I think I fit in.
Thank you. Okay, the next question I have is, what made you choose this genre, but also what is your experience in it? So when you actually, you're publishing in this, and your readers, in general, what's your experience in this area? And I'm going to start, I'll start with Ella Craft this time.
So I was hoping being in the middle, I'd never have to start.
I'm swapping it up here.
I think
Keeps you on your toes.
horror is you can literally get away with murder. You really, I mean, it's hard to offend a hardcore horror reader. I mean, anything goes. And that's what I like about the genre. I mean, guaranteed people have their preferences. Maybe it is the cosmic horror, or maybe it is ghosts or vampires or slashers. But in general, the horror audience is very hard to offend. You can be very liberal with it. And like, for instance, the romance genre, those people are very fussy. Like, if one thing goes wrong, they don't like one thing the heroine or hero said, like, they're all done. You don't give them the HEA, they're all done. They're mad at you now. Horror, you can get away with a good ending, you can get away with a vague ending, you can get away with a right up front, in your face bad ending. So I think in general I like horror because I feel there's a lot of freedom in the genre. And the people that I've had a chance to speak to kind of back that up. They're pretty good with everything. For a dark genre, it's a laid back, mellow crowd. It really is.
Alex, I'm going to go to you next.
I completely echo what people said. I mean, every convention I've been to, every group of horror writers that I've been with, they're the happiest, most laid-back, fun people you can be around. It's probably because we get all our evil out in our stories. I've hung out with authors from other genres and not necessarily the same experience. I'm not trying to say anything bad about a group, but definitely when you get in a room where there's 50 horror authors, you can have a good time. That's and why I got into it. I read everything and I watch everything. It's just when I start writing, that's where my head goes. If I have to go, if I have to go into which girl twists my arm, I'm gravitated towards the horror section. That's where I go. That's just how I've always been ever since I was a teenager. That's just what I've been.
What's your experience been?
Funny enough, when I first started writing, I was writing more comedy. That's kind of how I started writing in general. I was very inspired by Douglas Adams, and I kind of stayed in that sci-fi fantasy vein for a long time. And weirdly enough, writing horror and writing comedy walks an interesting line because the two can kind of be different sides of the same coin. So for me, that was kind of fun to explore in a certain way, but also horror, it really is a lot more free than most other genres. Science fiction, you have to worry about setting up rules and obeying them. Fantasy, you have to think of something in the fantasy genre that isn't just, oh hey, it's Tolkien again, which is a lot of fantasy out there. So with horror, you can do almost anything. And when I started reading Lovecraft and saw his wonderful blend of like science fiction and fantasy and adventure stories that kind of became the whole weird fiction genre, it was very much like, oh, so I can get away with a lot throwing all this together. And between that and just having the idea of writing a Lovecraftian novel set in Providence, kind of honoring him in a certain way, it just kind of all came together that way, and I loved it, and I just want to keep doing it, so I'm going to keep doing it.
Thank you. Now, I can, as you said, Alex, as far as laid back and pretty easy, putting this together was effortless. Everybody worked well, everybody knows each other, it worked great. You never know. Sometimes putting a panel together can be everybody butting heads, and they all worked well together, so it was quite easy, and I'm grateful on my end for that. The next question I have is, why do you feel like this is such an important category? Okay, this is, it's thrilling, it's exciting. Why do you feel it's important? And I think, Alex, you touched on it a little bit, as far as it gives people an opportunity. But, why do you, and where do you see it going? So why is it important in our culture today, and where do you see it going? And I'm going to start with you, Alex.
Why is it important? I think as a natural everyone is afraid of something, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of what has helped our species grow from the beginning, and we tell stories, around the fire, back in ancient days, and there was always something scary in those stories to teach a lesson, and I think that's an important thing. We all need to learn that sometimes the things we're afraid of, we don't need to be afraid of. Usually there's not something in the dark anymore to be afraid of, but back before we had electricity and we lived in the forest in tents, there were things to be afraid of in the dark. And we still have that instinctive fear built into our DNA. And so we'll always have something to be afraid of, whether it's real or not. And the horror genre kind of helps us deal with that in a way that's safe. These books have scary things in them, but they're not going to hurt you. And it kind of helps you build that muscle to protect yourself from the things that are scary in this world, in my opinion.
So it helps you build resilience.
Yeah, in a way. Scar tissue.
Fair enough. Okay.
Where it's going, I'm not really sure. I mean, everything evolves over time into something that no one else can really see. Lovecraft, in the early 20th century, at the time his writing was considered trash and it was considered pulp. But now, 100 years or so later, Stephen King, the biggest horror writer in the world, is hugely impacted by Lovecraft. Everything we see on TV these days is tremendously impacted by his work. All of our work is impacted by him, for sure. And it's so. Hopefully, one of us will be in charge in the next 100 years.
Okay. Well, I can speak from personal experience. Horror can be really weirdly therapeutic in a lot of ways. As I said, it shows you what you may not necessarily want to look at, but once you do, it's kind of like that epic quote from Frank Herbert's Dune. Fear is the mind killer. I will let it wash over me and pass through me. And horror is very much about that, because it's a great way of confronting something that you might be afraid of, but it's in a book or it's on a TV screen, and yeah, it's going to shock you. You're going to have a gut reaction, that's the point, but it won't actually do any damage to you. And maybe it'll help you even kind of figure out what you're afraid of in real life and be able to cope with it. Much easier way than if it were to, say, run and chase you down on the street. A little less safe there. And as far as the future of horror, I feel like horror has a really big future. I look around at modern media and I see that we are afraid of everything. We're afraid of our water, we're afraid of the air, we're afraid of our medication, we're afraid of our own mental illnesses, we're afraid of the politics, we're afraid of other countries. We're afraid of everything. Horror has a lot to draw on right now, and frankly, I think that we really need it.
Hopefully I can talk fast enough to make 2 quick points. The first one is getting scared is fun. Anybody see the movie Seven? I went the first weekend that it opened, and there's that one epic scene where there's that body in the bed that they think is a dead body, and they shine the light on him, and he sits up. And not one person in that theater didn't almost jump out of their seat, people are screaming, but 2 seconds later, we're all laughing at each other. It's a thrill. The heart races, and then as he said, nothing is actually going to hurt you, so now you can sit back and laugh at it. So I think getting scared is actually a good thing. It's fun, as long as you know nothing's really going to hurt you. The second point I'm going to make is a darker point. Horror feeds the beast. Everybody has a little bit of a dark side to them. If you have a dark side, you're not going to be reading horror. You're going to be reading comedy, romance, kids' books, chick flicks, things like that. So when you're reading horror, you're exploring that dark side of yourself through somebody else's dark visions. So I think horror is good for you in that too, because you know what, for me, writing is catharsis. It's when I'm angry, it's better to write about somebody getting killed than me doing something stupid, so you can pump your own emotion. I think horror is very driven. My writing in particular is a little anger driven. So it is good therapy, as Peter said. And as far as where horror is going, it's going the way the world's going, which means it's just going to get darker and darker because you can't look around and not see just death and bad news. And so as that gets darker, people are going to feed that darkness even more, I believe.
Okay, and believe it or not, we're actually getting towards the end, so I want to make sure I give you an opportunity for questions. Before I do that, I'd just like to mention where everyone is. It's in your program, but I do want to mention that Alex, you're at 107, you're at table 107, and I know that Peter, you're at 303, and LL Craft is at 317. So they are in your program if you wanted to reach out to them. We have time for a couple of quick questions. I also wanted to mention that Alex, you're on the sci-fi and fantasy panel. That's immediately the next one in this room. It's going to be at 12:15. So anybody that's interested in that as well, please join it. And unlike your doc review, I'm actually leading a workshop on motivation for writers. Just giving myself a shout out there at 1:30. I'm in the opposite one though. Needless to say, we should get.
And I have to sit next to her. All the time, yeah.
Okay. So questions for our authors.
Do you guys have any like suggestions for favorite like horror designs or like mags or anything like that? Horror literary magazines or
Magazines?
like designs, yeah. Any that like you particularly think are well done or
Grimward's a good one. Yeah.
For independent horror.
I think Fangoria is still around, but I think that's more movie focused.
Yes, Fangoria is very film
Yeah.
oriented, but that's a classic that I grew up with.
There's a lot of websites.
Dirge magazine, you can find them on Twitter. They also have a Patreon site. They're kind of small, but they're really good articles about like horror throughout culture, not just horror itself.
And I know that there's the H.P. Lovecraft e-zine as well out there. I would be remiss if I didn't mention it.
Okay. Any other questions?
a couple of you mentioned briefly about having these comic relief moments in there to break up the horror. I'm wondering how do you balance having those moments without breaking the mood?
She asked, just in case you couldn't hear, she asked, how do you add the comic relief in without breaking the mood completely?
From my own experience, horror is the moment, like he said, there's that moment where the body you think is dead sits up. That's the horror. Everyone's reaction after that, that's the comedy. Like the walking corpse coming up and everyone is terrified and oh my god, what's happening? We have to deal with this. And then after they deal with it, that's when whoever's left alive is kind of going, oh my god, that was a walking corpse. And that's where the comedy really comes in. It's the post-fright reaction where everybody is kind of calming down a little bit but their adrenaline is still up. And that's usually where, if you're a fan of Supernatural, that's where you get the famous Dean Winchester one-liners. So in my experience, the comedy comes after the scare has run its course and everybody is kind of like coming back to baseline. And that's where you can kind of get everybody built up so that the next scare can slap them down again.
Yeah, he took the term from me, the one-liner. We've all seen the movies where something horrific happens and one character, usually the same character throughout, comes up with that really bad one-liner. As far as my writing goes, there's a lot of dark comedy. For me, it's through sarcasm. Like, people are sarcastic, they make sarcastic remarks, and I think it's a matter of flow. I think you either have it or you don't. You can add comedy, because if you don't have a flow, then it just looks gratuitous. There's a lot of it in this book because of Kitty, who acts like an 8-year-old girl, so you're in the middle of all these horrific scenes, and in one scene, Sophia kills somebody, and they're getting ready to walk away, and Kitty's like, hey, wait a minute, let's look in his pockets, he said he had candy. You know, he was talking about cocaine, actually. But she's like, I thought he had candy. You better have candy or you're in trouble. So it's things like that. Like, I built that into that character because you can only bang away at somebody for so long without needing to get them, uplifted. So I think a good joke is a good thing in the middle of it.
I think he nailed it with the sarcasm term. Most of I don't use a lot of humor, but I tend to be pretty sarcastic, and I look at some of the crazy situations that I put the characters in, and I say, what would I say? You know, if that just happened near me, and it's usually something pretty stupid. You know, how would I react, or what would I say, or what would my wife say, or what would my friends say? You just kind of try and make it as realistic as you can, even though it's a very unreal situation. And that can, watching a horror movie, those things aren't going to happen in 99% of the movies you watch, unless it's a real life story. So you just kind of think about, what would I say in that moment?
Believe it or not, our time has ended, so I appreciate you being here. We're going to be here all day. Our authors will be here all day. Please stop by their booths. Stop by. You can even ask them now. But I appreciate you being here, and I thank my authors.
Thank Gina for moderating.
Thank you.
Have a beautiful day.
Anybody got a towel? Yeah, I know.